I've always found it strange, almost absurd, that in the past the Crown of England could change hands, not through elections, not even through peaceful succession, but through murder on a battlefield. I mean, literal steel-drenched murder. That's how Henry Tudor became king in 1485. He didn't win a vote, he won a sword fight, and we all just accepted that. Today, the idea of becoming king by killing the king is not only illegal, it's unthinkable. But it wasn't always. So how did we get from there to here? From the age of thrones soaked in blood to a monarchy that can't even make law? What changed? And what does that say about how we see power, violence and legitimacy? Because behind the story of kings and queens is really the story of all of us. Let's go back to where it ended and then trace how we stopped killing kings and started crowning them. Why did we let Henry Tudor get away with killing one? August the 22nd, 1485. The fields near Bosworth were slick with blood by mid-morning. Two armies, banners snapping in the wind, one side wearing the boar of Richard III, the other rallying behind the red dragon of Henry Tudor. It wasn't just a battle, it was a decision. In that moment, England was choosing a king the only way it really knew how, through violence. Richard died fighting. We're told he cried out, a horse, my kingdom for a horse." But by the time the dust cleared, his crown was found on a thorn bush and placed on Henry's head, right there on the battlefield. There was no coronation, no ceremony, just might, and that meant right. But what's wild is how this was seen as completely legitimate. Parliament later confirmed Henry VII's reign as beginning the day before the battle, retroactively turning Richard's supporters into traitors. No inheritance, no vote, just victory. So why didn't people rise up in outrage? Because for hundreds of years, that's how the crown worked. Kings were expected to be strong, even brutal. If you could take the crown by war, assassination, by rebellion, and hold on to it, that was proof that you were meant to have it. But that kind of power is unstable. And after Bosworth, the cracks in that logic started to show. Because once you've got the crown by killing for it, what's to stop the next man from killing you? So what changed first? How did we go from might makes right to something closer to law? After Henry VII, England saw a parade of Tudors, and let's be honest, they weren't shy about using violence to keep the throne. Henry VIII killed his wives, Elizabeth I executed rival claimants. Power still meant blood. But behind the scenes, something else was happening. Law was starting to matter. I don't mean criminal law for ordinary people. I mean the beginnings of constitutional thinking. The idea that kings themselves might be bound by rules. Think about this. By the time Elizabeth died in 1603, there was already tension over what gave monarchy authority. Was it divine right, chosen by God, or was it something else? Something granted, even if grudgingly, by the people. The English Civil War would push this to breaking point, because when Charles I started acting like the law didn't apply to him, raising taxes without parliament, imprisoning opponents without trial, people pushed back. And for the first time in English history, they didn't just kill the king, they executed him with charges, a trial, and a death sentence. That wasn't murder, that was politics. Charles I was beheaded in 1649 for treason, not against himself, but against England. The king, it turned out, could be held accountable. And in that moment, something huge shifted. The crown wasn't above the law anymore, it was beneath it. But if the king could be put on trial and killed, who had the right to rule? After the Civil War, England experimented with a republic, but it didn't last. By 1660, the monarchy was restored, but the genie wasn't going back in the bottle. Charles II returned to the throne, but he did so under a cloud. He knew better than to challenge Parliament. His brother, James II, didn't learn that lesson. When James started ignoring Parliament, favouring Catholics and asserting royal power, the country snapped again. But this time, there was no war. In 1688, Parliament invited William of Orange to invade. James fled, and at that moment, peaceful, mostly bloodless, is what we now call the Glorious Revolution. William and Mary became co-monarchs, but not by birth, by agreement. They signed the Bill of Rights in 1689, which spelled it out clearly. No taxes without Parliament, no standing army without consent, no suspending laws on a royal whim. It wasn't just about one bad king, it was a declaration. Sovereignty belonged to the people through Parliament. The monarchy would survive, but it would no longer rule. That's the moment England became a constitutional monarchy. So now, if power comes from Parliament, not God or bloodline, where does that leave the monarch? Over the next 2 centuries, the monarchy slowly receded into ceremony, but it didn't vanish. Victorian England still adorned its kings and queens, but their role was symbolic. The real power lay in the grey machinery of government, prime ministers, cabinets, and eventually elected parliaments. Reform Acts expanded the vote, first to property-owning men, then to all men, then to women. Bit by bit, the people took ownership of their own government. And with each expansion, the monarchy's role narrowed. No longer a king who could kill to keep power, now a monarch who signs what Parliament tells them. And yet, we still have a crown. We still bow. We still watch coronations. There's something deeper at play, some longing for continuity, identity, tradition. But today, the monarch is no longer a ruler. They're a symbol of the state. Which brings us to a final question. In a world of democracy and law, what actually happens if someone tries to take the crown today? Let me be clear, if you were to attempt to kill a monarch today, you would not become king. You wouldn't be hailed as a victor, you wouldn't sit on a throne. You'd be arrested, tried and imprisoned for murder, just like anyone else. In fact, under UK law, the killing of the monarch is simply treated as murder, albeit with enormous symbolic consequences. There's no special treason crown clause anymore that lets you become sovereign by slaying your predecessor. Even treason law itself has changed. The Treason Act of 1351 technically still exists, but most modern prosecutions would proceed under standard criminal law. And here's the big shift. The monarchy isn't the source of power anymore. If the monarch were to die, tragically or violently, Parliament would meet. The line of succession would still apply. There's no legal vacuum, no battlefield, no bush to pick up the crown from. You can't win the crown anymore because the crown doesn't rule. So if all that's true, why do we keep the crown at all? And that is where we go next. Because if the monarchy no longer governs, if it no longer kills or is killed for power, if it has become essentially a symbol without teeth, why does it still command such loyalty, such ceremony, such pageantry? In the next episode, we're going to explore how the crown survived at all. Why didn't we become a republic like America? And why does the Prime Minister still kneel before the King? And what does it mean to keep a monarchy in a democratic age? Because in some ways, the crown is no longer about authority, it's about continuity. But what happens when that continuity is challenged? From days of kings who took power by force to a monarch who reigns by consent. The story of the crown is really the story of how we learn to rule ourselves. Can you have a crown without a kingdom to command?